well for chatting with Mr. Pedro Duque. So please give a warm applause again for dear Glessa. How dear? With a feather. Nice to have you back on stage. And I think Mr. Pedro Duque is waiting for us. So we can maybe say hi to him. Mr. Pedro Duque, ¿qué tal? Buenos días, buen día. Hello, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Buenos días, buen día. Hello, good morning. Hi, Dirk.
Hi there.
So, dear and Mr. Pedro Duque, I'll leave you so you can chat and I'll see you later, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duque. Thank you very much for being here today with us at the second edition of the Sustainable Destination Summit. Let me just explain why I'm wearing a feather while doing the interview with you. It's in honor of a token which was given to me by the previous speaker, Chief Antoine, from the Bonaparte First Nation. We spoke about his intervention prior to your intervention to enrich the participants over here with another dimension of sustainability. He carried on this feather and remembered a conversation we had many years ago when we spoke about the commitment of a region in Canada, Thompson, Okanagan, to sustainability and connecting the people. And he brought this token to me. So this is a feather. I don't think you had many feathers in space. But for our interview, Mr. Duque, I just wanted to remind the audience that you have been the country's first astronaut, as it was just said, and that you served as a Minister of Science, Innovation and Universities and as a Minister of Science and Innovation of the government of Spain. You hold a degree in aeronautical engineering. You have completed 2 space missions, including supervising the experimental module of the European Space Agency during the first mission. You received numerous awards, including the Order of the Friendship and the Prince of Asturias Award for International Cooperation. Mr. Duque, in our previous conversation, I explained to you a bit the logics, why an astronaut and tourism, why we both will not speak about space tourism, but why the perspective you have made as a human being, as an astronaut, is so interesting for us to hear here today. We know that astronauts, when training for space, learn to operate with very strict and defined limits when it comes to water, when it comes to oxygen, and that is totally in contrast to what most people here in the room are used to deal with. So as a very first, very pragmatic question, what kind of limits are you trained as an astronaut in your training to deal with when being in space?
Yes, Dirk, thanks for the explanation. I saw a little bit of the previous presentation, so I saw the moment when you were handed the feather. It was a very interesting moment. When we go to space, I think the most generic way of explaining is that we are faced with the limitations of what is actually possible with the human technology. We go on the verge of what is humanly possible with the technology, and we expand technology in order to actually get there. So I think the most important limitation that we have is if you are going to the limits of technology, you need to be permanently prepared that things may not work 100% because they are being tested. And therefore, I think the most important limitation that we have there, aside from the resources that you very accurately described, the most important limitation that we have is that we are using technology in such an extreme manner that we need to be constantly aware that everything may have a small error, and therefore we have to be prepared for every possible error that happens in our spacecraft. This obviously, well, it is a big limitation of the initiative that you can have in a spacecraft, because it is very important that you learn to operate within the pre-taken decisions. somebody has looked into what every single piece of the maybe 2 billion pieces in a spacecraft what can be the consequence of every of these 2 million pieces failing.
And I think that this is training. So this is training against something which before was not a normal custom. And this training becomes then a custom for an astronaut. And when you are traveling in space, more and more it becomes something of your customs. But when you then returned from space for the very first time, how did you disconnect, or did you continue with these customs? What did this mean for your day-to-day life?
It happens a little bit like probably happens on all professions in which there's the need of very strict adherence to a certain set of rules, or being aware of things that you are normally not very aware in your regular life. So we become, as a person, a little bit extremely aware of what could go wrong, and therefore sometimes the people around us think of us as a person who is always trying to foresee the problems, and this sometimes make us not a very good companion for several things. We cannot ride a car without thinking what would happen if a tire goes flat. Do we have a repair kit, or do we have a spare tire? And once we know this, then we go in the car. But yes, we are sometimes a little bit of a not completely pleasant to go with, if you know what I mean.
I know perfectly, and it is very nice to hear that from you, and I think that this is exactly the message we would like you to share with us over here. What do you think we being here in the room discussing sustainability in destinations with a focus on tourism, but what can we learn from that concern which you took on, where you said this made you very concerned, it made you coming up with these habits? Is there a message you would like us to remember?
I think that this habit of looking for what could go wrong is, in reality, is applicable in different levels to many different activities. Obviously, when you're organizing a trip of people in a big truck, open truck, for example, into an area where there can be lions, it's very good to have thought first of what could go wrong. And therefore, our attitude, even though it is a little bit extreme, it is well, in general, something that is good to have for the person who is in charge of a trip or of an adventure. This is clearly true, and our attention to detail on what could go wrong and what would we do in that case has opened new spaces for even tourism. So it is, if you are very much aware of what could go wrong and you put the means for everything, you can even get people that are not trained, that is the whole thing, into adventures that normally require very well-trained people, like going in a submarine, or obviously going up the mountains, things like that. But I think that in the area of sustainability, the better connection between what we would do in space and what is being done in the tourism industry is if we use the fact that we take people to other places to see other areas of the earth as an occasion to teach them, yes, the earth is very varied, but we are all in the same boat. If you destroy your destination, it will have an impact eventually on your life, in your original place where you live. This taking the earth as one single thing means if you go to the forest, then it is very useful to take people to the forest so that they know that these forests are absorbing the CO2, they're creating your own oxygen, which is then spread to the whole planet. I think this when tourism is long range, then probably sees the Earth as we see it from space.
That is a very interesting transition, because what I wanted to share with you is that I want to hear from you whether this is true. I read that astronauts state very often that they realize how precious our world is, and that they come to know how little we know as human beings about our own planet. That they say they can't see there from space looking back on Earth. They can't see borders. They see the world as one entity, and they see the world, and that I found very interesting, as their home, the place they want to return to. Is that true?
It is true that more and more we have to try to teach everybody from the youngest ages that the world is one single entity in terms of resources, and therefore we have to strive for the sustainability of the world as a whole. There's a very beautiful sentence from one astronaut that I saw in one of these books of pictures taken from astronauts, that says, the first day we were in space, we looked down on Earth and looked for our own village. Therefore, their own words, after a week, we looked for our own country. And then when we were there for several weeks or a month, then we considered all of the Earth our own country and our own village. And I think that is a spirit that we have to try to transmit to everybody. And of course, the most accessible way of seeing the world as one single entity is obviously traveling the world. Around the Earth, it's obviously very obvious. It becomes very natural to consider the world as a single entity, but you have also a contribution on taking people from one place to the world to another, to just add an element of teaching them, yes, and all that you are seeing is also your home. It's not somebody else's home, but whatever happens to this part of the world that you're visiting has a very direct bearing on how the whole world will be or not be sustainable, and therefore you and your children and your children's children.
Mr. Duque, the other thing I read, and I wanted to hear from you again whether this is true for you. I read that other astronauts, once they have been to space, they said that it changed them profoundly, and it changed them for better. Is this something you also personally felt when returning from space? I
did certainly feel that by going through the whole process that ends eventually when landing back on the Earth after going to space, then you are changed very much. However, the period that you are in space is only a part of it. One of the most important, let's say, parts of astronaut life that changes you is being able, because of all the years of training, being able to talk to people of different cultures, to exercise patience when people think different than you, to be able to see that there are intelligent people in many parts of the world. which is quite similar to if you have the privilege of being able to travel a lot on the Earth without really having the need of training. And really, I believe that that we see when you are really on the space station and you see the Earth and you see that it is a round ball, it takes 1.5 hours only to go around. You see that wherever you look, there's empty space. This can be transmitted to people just by pictures and videos and so on. And it should be, because eventually we are flying in a spaceship that is on the edge of technology, on which resources are very scarce, and we have to be very, very careful that every watt of energy that we spend is compensated by every watt of energy that we generate from the sun, that every water that we spend is recycled to the extent possible, all of the things that happen in our spacecraft in order to actually make it possible to go to space. But in the other hand, you turn back, you turn out to the window, and you see that the Earth is like that too. Which it's a spacecraft. It's a ball going through space that we see very large. It has thousands of kilometers of diameter, but in the whole scheme of things and the whole size of the universe is just a little spacecraft where all of us are sharing resources. And I think it is very important that your industry adds, as you're doing here, an element of teaching sustainability by showing people what happens in other parts of our single spacecraft and teaching them that we are going through space. We are going through space together, and there's nothing we can do about it, and therefore we need to be very, very careful with the resources.
Mr. Duque, thank you so much for this very personal interpretation of what we can learn from a destination's point of view, from the outer space of you and your experience as an astronaut. It is for us a great pleasure to hear from a minister who has made then also experiences in public policy and policy making. We thank you very much for having been today with us and inspiring us from a completely different dimension. Mr. Duque, on behalf of everybody here in the room, thank you very much, and we hope we carry on in the spirits you inspired in us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Will, for inviting me, and thank you for taking good care of the planet.
Thank you so much, Iglesias, for this chat, for this interview. Thank you so much, Mr. Duque. It's been